One of the issues that we heard a lot about this morning was the extraordinary growth that London is about to go through, perhaps up to 10 million by 2030, 11 million by 2050. But I suppose, what do you see as the biggest challenges that a city like London faces? Is it about housing? Is it about transport? Is it about pollution? What are the big challenges?
Well, it must be about all of those things, but just to pick two, I mean, clearly housing at the moment is the number one issue for London. I think there's no question about that. I think the other issue is how we kind of get to grips with the density debate, because clearly London is densifying, partly because of the green belt. It's the right thing to do, but politically we haven't found a language to talk to Londoners about that doesn't equate density with bad things, and density itself doesn't sound very good. So somebody needs to, or we all collectively need to get across a vision for a denser London that is still London. High quality of life, low rise, lots of parks, lots of green space.
So after 8 years, do you think that we're actually closer to meeting those challenges?
Well, on the housing front, yes, to a degree, but obviously we need to ratchet it up further. I think we're keeping up with London's growth, but we definitely need the next wave of bigger infrastructure policies and programs that are going to deliver the support to the growth that's expected. Our position is that the growth will happen, whether you like it or not. It's about how high quality that growth is going to be. People are going to come, but they're either going to be in high quality accommodation or they're going to be in sheds in people's backyards.
Do you recognise the issues that Rory from Open Cities was mentioning earlier? That there is a lot of growth which is being catered for by the bean counters. There's a lot of development which is really perhaps not quite so community focused as it ought to be.
I think we're so focused on just getting the numbers out there that perhaps that, in the rush to try and get the numbers out, there isn't perhaps the time or the intention to focus on exactly what this looks like. But I think the two feed off of each other, because if we were able to articulate why your neighborhood in a denser form is actually going to be better for you, then you get a lot less of the NIMBYism. Because for most people, growth is not a good thing. Growth is a bad thing. It's people driving up house prices, taking school places away. So we need to find a way to talk to existing Londoners about why growth is good for them, not just for the people who are arriving.
We've also heard this morning from Miles Ashley from London Underground, and of course he described Crossroad 2 as being a housing project.
Yeah.
For you, is that a philosophy which you've seen change over the last 8 years, that we are moving away from, I suppose, the silo mentality of let's build a railway, or let's build a tube, or let's build some housing?
Yeah, well, we've worked very hard to try and move ourselves away from that. It's something I've been very active in, and Eddie Lister as well, my colleague. If you look at the history of London, London grew along the tube lines, but then we sort of lost all of that somewhere along the way, partly because there was a lot of public money available, so tube lines started to be built by public grant funding. That's not available anymore, so suddenly it's back to the future, and we're going back to the old way of building things, which is that you need to capture the land value around transport infrastructure, recognize there's going to be big growth, and actually capture that land value to fund the transport infrastructure. So the only way that anybody's going to fund Crossrail 2, nobody's going to give us a check for £24 billion, or £10 billion for that matter. But if we can say these are the number of homes that we can deliver, which otherwise won't happen, and harness some of that uplift in land value, that's the only way Crossrail 2 is going to happen. So it has to be a housing project.
Big issues that remain, though, and possibly will become increasingly important around air pollution. A city like London, a city like Manchester, a city like Liverpool, every city is facing massive challenges around air pollution. Do you think that will hold back growth?
I'm very proud of the things that we've done on air pollution over the last 8 years. It's one of those fantastic topics on environment that people actually really do care about and get exercised about. Because everybody says they want to live in a greener city, but when it really comes down to it, maybe they don't care, and maybe politically they're not going to put any pressure on politicians. Climate change is one of those topics people care about, but they don't write to their politicians about it. Air quality, we get lots of correspondence about. So it's great to be able to use that political pressure and turn it into the ability to do policies that are quite tough. The ultra-low emission zone that's coming in 2020, that has an impact on the economy of hundreds of millions of pounds in terms of forcing people to upgrade their vehicles faster than they otherwise would have wanted to. So, I see it as a catalyst for, a nicer city, a more progressive city, a cleaner city. So I don't think it's going to hold back growth. If anything, the pressure that growth creates on that topic unlocks the ability to do things about it, which is to buy green buses and force people to have cleaner cars.
Provided, I suppose, that that there is a change in, or that the necessary policy is made. And I suppose that brings us on to the next big change, other than a GLA, other than, of course, you leaving. The big change is that we're going to have a new mayor. Whatever colour, we will have a new mayor and a new administration. And I suppose, from your perspective, does it matter? Does it matter from a perspective of growth, of pollution, of transport? Does it matter who wins?
Well, my job's politically restricted, so I'm not able to comment on the election per se. But I think London's like any other big world city. The politics are quite different from the rest of the country. You tend to, in big cities, get people voting, not sticking with party political lines. People want somebody who's a big city mayor, who's progressive, who's broad church, and generally that's the kind of people that you get in to run big cities around the world. So I think a lot of people will be looking at the policies of the mayoral candidates, not necessarily being party political about it.
So from what you've seen about the policies that are being talked about, without asking who you back, are you happy with the kind of policies that are being discussed?
I think it's not all come out yet, and there's a lot of things that people can't talk about before an election. So I've got some views on some more radical policies that I think need to be brought in the next mayoral term, for example, around congestion. But it's not surprising that no mayoral candidate really is going to talk about those issues in the run-up to the election, because they're electorally probably not very popular or hard to get across to the electorate. So hopefully after the mayoral election, new mayor's transport strategy, that's the real chance to get some more interesting policies on the agenda.
Of course, one thing you can talk about this morning is you can talk about Brexit now, can't you? Do you have a view on the referendum that you'd like to share with us, because you are able to? You have permission from Boris to give us a view.
I don't really know whether people care that much about it.
Do we care to want a view?
I don't know.
Everyone wants a view. You were able to make a view. I mean,
No, my only view is based on the fact that I'm a German citizen. The reason I can work here is because I have a German passport. So the torture of getting a British passport obviously makes me an inner, because I just don't want to go through the hassle of getting a British passport. So it's purely logistics.
I think that sounds positive to me. Anyway, the housing challenge. We heard some views by Robin earlier there. I mean, how do you describe London's current housing challenge? I mean, is it a crisis? I suppose, is it solvable?
I think it is. I mean, what we've tried to do from a transport perspective is to say, right, transport infrastructure is going to unlock a chunk of this housing. There's areas where we're expecting 5,000, 10,000 new homes, where we have to confront the fact that they're not going to happen without transport infrastructure. So I've tried to harness the transport investment much more directly into the housing areas. We created a big growth fund at TfL, which is entirely about supporting places that don't have a transport business case, because there's no people there at the moment. And you're never going to get those business cases through TfL, because there aren't any people to carry. You're carrying oxygen around for 5 years before anybody even shows up. So one thing we need to do is be able to ring fence funding within TfL, but also harness other sources of funding out there, whether that's the boroughs, the developers, et cetera. And we don't really have that skill set in-house, so we've tried to build that up a lot. So there's a lot that you can do within the transport sector that's better than what we did 10 years ago, but that needs to carry on, and we need to build that ability out more. But fundamentally, as I see it, I'm not a housing expert, but the fundamental position is that the housing industry don't want to build any more homes. They're just fine. They're making lots of money, and they've more or less said as much to me on numerous occasions. So I think it is actually about the structure of the industry, and all the policy making that's out there. That's all nice, but fundamentally, it's the structure of the industry that's causing some of these problems.
But at the heart of your policy plans, and you launched it around about this time last year, I think, is the London 2050 infrastructure plan.
Yeah.
And I suppose what's different about that plan is it does start from an outcome. It starts from what outcomes you want to achieve and then works backwards. I mean, what kind of traction have you received over the last year from it? What kind of interest has it made a difference?
The biggest thing that's come out of it is that people from water, energy, transport, planning, housing suddenly are all talking to each other. We've got a group of senior people who are all sort of chief exec level who get together anywhere between once a month, once every 2 months. And it's absolutely shocking how little interaction there is between these sectors. You have people, for the first time ever, you've got senior people at Thames Water, at SGN, all the utility providers actually understanding places like the Lee Valley where there's 200,000 homes are supposed to be built in the Lee Valley. Now, clearly, they're not getting built next year, but none of this was on their radar at all. It's not a criticism of them. It's because they don't operate in that way. But surely, as an industry, as an infrastructure industry in London, we need to have a shared understanding of where is growth going to happen, are we geared up for that, lobbying the regulators to make sure that they've got the right sort of structure within the regulatory framework to support investment into those areas. So the fact that all those conversations are now happening and they didn't 2 years ago, I mean, shocking though that may be, that to me is the single biggest thing that we've achieved. It sounds really basic, but then you can get all of those bilateral discussions happening that need to happen.
So if you're an infrastructure, a built environment professional here today, I mean, what kind of difference do you really think that that's going to make? Is it about being able to embrace innovative ideas? Is it about reducing the time spent in planning?
Yeah,
What
I think it's accelerating. I mean, if you take the example of the Northern Line extension that we're building, so there was obviously a lot of interaction between the guys who are building the homes there and the transport people who are building the extension. What didn't happen was a proper strategic discussion with the utility providers. So all of a sudden, at the last minute, everybody's saying, you know, oh my gosh, floodwater, and oh, do we need a substation? Nobody figured that one out. I'm stereotyping this situation because it's a very long saga, but the problem is there isn't that strategic engagement around these huge areas that are going to have 30,000 homes in them, 20,000 homes. And what then happens is that everybody's got to retrofit it, costs more, takes a lot longer. So those conversations will actually accelerate projects and bring down the cost of delivering them. Surely that's a good thing.
And is it also making the private sector more comfortable about investing in the capital? Are you seeing, I suppose, a better route towards bringing in private funding? You talked about the Northern Line extension, and I suppose that is a model which seems to be working. I mean, is it helping? Is that a driver? Is that a goal?
I mean, it's absolutely essential, but we haven't seen a big improvement in that area. It's a huge issue for the industry, and I think everybody's kind of looking at each other to try and fix it. So we've got a kind of wall of projects that are unfunded, and then everybody keeps saying, oh, pension funds, they've got billions of pounds, and they'd love to invest it in London. And why isn't it happening? Nobody can understand why. My own view on this, which I've said many times, is the issue is that they're not going to spend the 3 months, 6 months shaping up the business case of each of these projects. They want someone else to do that. They want to look at a spreadsheet, see how the risk is allocated, see what the funding streams are, and then they'll make a decision. They're not going to spend, put a team of people on it on the off chance that they might be interested in investing in it. On the flip side, we don't have the skill set in-house to actually do that work. We've got literally 1.5 people who can do that, and there's 30 locations across London where we need that work to be done. So we either need to, reskill a group of people within the GLA family and TfL, or we need to outsource that and get, banks and the Big Four and whoever in to do that work. But that is the issue. It's not about a lack of money, but these business cases and the kind of funding structure, the financing structure, the risk allocation is not going to write itself. Somebody's going to have to do that. The private sector isn't doing it. I think I'd like to see them doing a lot more of that, but it isn't realistic. They're very conservative, and they've got plenty to do already.
Sounds like a very good job for an engineering or an architectural consultancy to be doing in the future. Is that sort of thing you
Well, I mean, it's an interesting issue for the industry, because I think the infrastructure industry is often seen as a kind of engineering industry, but that isn't an engineering skill set. It's a finance skill set and a kind of deal-making mentality, which is more of a banker type of personality. And that's one of the issues that we also have internally within TfL. It's people who are, they will design you a railway to the nth level of detail, and at that point they'll say, oh, now we maybe should go and talk to somebody about how we're going to pay for it. No, I mean, before you put pen to paper, that's when you go and talk to the bankers and the accountants, and you figure it out first. And one of the things we've done, for example, on the Bakerloo Line extension, is actually say the route should be determined by where we can get the biggest funding from external sources because of the land value uplift, rather than letting the transport engineers say, the most beautiful and perfect route is to bring it this way. In South London, you put a tube anywhere, it'll be fantastic. It'll have a huge transport benefit because there aren't tube networks in South London, so that doesn't matter. The issue is where we can get the regeneration, get the housing, and get the land value uplift.
On that note, I noticed that the Estuary Airport still sits within the London 2050 plan. Is that presumably inevitably will change?
In what sense?
In the 2050 plan will have to be revised to not include an estuary airport.
Why do you say that?
Are you saying that it's still an option that's on the table then?
I don't see why not. I mean, certainly that's the mayor's position. if anybody thinks that we've got a kind of 50 to 100-year solution to the airport's problem in London, then I'd love to see that person, because I don't think we do.
So you would say from your position where you are now that there is still a chance that and a need for an estuary airport.
Well, I think we can all agree there's a need for a clearer strategic vision for aviation for London, which nobody has articulated and actually delivered. I mean, we think we've articulated one, but there needs to be one that's actually executed now, and I don't think anybody's come forward with that.
So perhaps
luckily, I don't look after aviation.
I know you don't look
happily
after it,
for me.
That's
the one area that I don't look after.
But it's good that you've got a view on it, and presumably, well, it's not something which is talked usually about on the hustings by the mayoral candidates. That wouldn't surprise you.
I actually don't. I mean, I've said this to Boris. I don't think it's an issue that the public care about. I don't think it's an electoral issue.
Right.
As an individual who lives in London, I can show up at an airport, get to where I need to go. So a normal human being in London doesn't care. It's one of these classic Westminster Bubble type of issues that all of us who think and talk about these issues think it's so important and fascinating, but the normal punter on the street doesn't actually care.
But it is an example of big thinking, and I suppose when I look around in a show like this, or with an audience like this, after 8 years in the position you've been, do you think that built environment professionals are generally thinking big enough about the solutions to transport, the solutions to housing, the solutions to airports? Are they thinking big enough? Are they bold enough? Taking enough risks?
Nothing personal, but no. No, I mean, I think we've sort of lived off of the kind of pent-up 50 to 80 years list of projects that we all wanted to build. Then over the last 10 to 20 years, we've managed to bring quite a few of those things forward. So I think it's very important for the whole industry, with the new Mayor's Transport Strategy and London Plan, which will start to be written this year, it's an opportunity to start to bring some of these new ideas into the plan. And, why aren't we talking about Crossrail 3, 4, and 5? What are they? I mean, Crossrail 1 was just some guy drawing a line on a map. Crossrail 2 was the same thing. We can pretend there was all kinds of science behind it, but it's not true. So, I would love to see people coming forward with lots of new ideas for, where they'd like to see extensions, what they'd like to see from the railway network, aviation, whatever it is. And I don't think that there's enough of that going on at the moment. I'm not sure why. There's a certain passivity in general, but, I've very rarely been approached by anyone in the private sector for really big new ideas about infrastructure projects for London. I think once in my whole tenure on transport has that happened.
And is that because the projects we see built, the ideas we see moved to from the drawing board to actual reality, are they either the easy ones or the easy options? Are they
No.
or are they just the ones that are bankable by the finances?
I think there's a perception that the projects that come forward somehow are politically, it's slightly random. It's whatever gets picked up by a politician. But we can all shape what gets picked up by a politician. This notion that politics is somewhere out there and then we're all, beavering away diligently over here, that's not the case. So I think the industry generally needs to be more political and kind of embrace politics as a force for change. Bakerloo Line extension. TfL didn't want to build that for lots of good reasons. The mayor was going to MIP him a couple of years ago, wanted to make a big announcement, and he announced that we were going to build the Bakerloo Line extension, and now we're actually bringing it forward. So that's a great example where that was entirely political, arguably, but that's a good thing. That's been a force for good. So we should all be going to all the politicians and saying, here are my 10 brilliant ideas, and get politicians to bring these projects forward.
So your advice to people like Robin and his plans for land is just to keep plugging away and keep making noise about these issues.
But I think it's very difficult as an individual to do that, or an individual organization. So the more, but where is, I don't know, some of the big associations, the trade associations, they put out manifestos for London, but it's not that simple. You can't just produce a report. You do have to do a lot of lobbying with the candidates, with the assembly, and have some persistence and some tenacity. But I do think there's more that can be done. I'm just, sitting where I'm sitting, I would observe that there's more that the industry could be doing on that.
So you're going off to work for Arup. I mean, is that going to be at the core of the work you're doing with Arup?
I don't know. I'm going to find out what I'm doing when I get there.
Oh, they haven't told you yet. Be very afraid. But no, I suppose Arup, I suppose, is associated with new thinking. It's associated with bold ideas. I mean, presumably, you have got ideas about how infrastructure and housing and transport can be radically improved?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully one of the ways I can help, in general and working in the industry is understanding how you can use political engagement as a force for getting things to happen, as opposed to the quite common perception that it's a force for slowing things down. And there's a science to that, really, that you can derive and you can learn to sort of manipulate, and how you use public engagement and all of those sorts of things, which is something I've sort of had direct experience of. So there's that element of it. But there's also a lot of things that we've done in London and things that I wish we'd done but we haven't done, which I don't think the industry's doing enough on. I mean, air quality, for example. Every city in the world should have a proper air quality strategy with a program of work underneath that. We've got something like that in London. Some people think we should have more things within our toolbox, but we do broadly have something, and that's something doing a global role at Arab. I think we could be doing a lot more of that generally as an industry, and obviously it's an opportunity for us as well.
Do you think, looking to the future, that we properly distinguish between what the public needs and then what the public wants? I mean, I'm thinking, we heard about branding earlier, and the power of Apple, about the way that Apple second guesses, or it gets in there and tells people what they want before they know they want it.
Yeah.
I mean, is there kind of a lesson to learn from that about delivering infrastructure and for
Definitely. I mean, I think there's within the infrastructure, most people who come into I'll just speak about transport because I know that the best, but I know a bit about the rest of the infrastructure industry. Most people who come into transport because they love trains and cars and things like that. But most normal people out there only care about the outcome that those things deliver. I always say to colleagues, people want transport to be invisible. They don't want to experience transport. They want to not experience transport. And that's something that's quite hard for a lot of transport professionals to hear, because they want everyone to appreciate how wonderful the bogies are and things like that. Normal people don't care about that. So there's something about getting ourselves into the heads of the public who's going to be experiencing the infrastructure, or who need to say yes to some of these projects, and trying to position what we want to do in a way that they can hear and understand, and engaging the public earlier on. I mean, I created a big roads program in London, which Boris has dubbed Operation Paralysis, but it's all going to be fine next year. And later this year. And one of the things that we've learned from that is that, you often, it was interesting looking at the BIM stuff earlier, when we talk about roads projects, we show people these two-dimensional designs with lane markings, and I mean, it's so tedious, it's incomprehensible, and it's certainly not inspiring. And a normal member of the public who lives around Vauxhall Gyratory or Elephant and Castle or Highbury Corner, like all places where we've got schemes either being delivered or being consulted on, normal people look at that and, what does that mean? I have no idea. Where's the beautiful picture of what it's all going to look like? So, that's something we've worked on to try and we've got a whole team of people now who produce images of what the world's going to be like if you say yes to this, but also work on producing those images joint with the community, not here's our fantastic idea, please sign here to say you love it.
Being customer focused rather than infrastructure focused.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds really basic, but I can tell you for a fact it doesn't happen. Just, again, sitting where I sit, looking at the projects that we've worked on, it's been very hard work to get all of us to articulate these things in a way that normal people can actually hear, understand, and get excited about.
Yeah. We've got a few more minutes. Does anyone have a question they want to put to Isabel about anything? I'll come down. Is that okay? Yep.
It's absolutely fine.
Hello, just a question really about the direction of travel of TfL. It seems to be coming from traffic for London to someplace more interesting. And I just wonder if you could comment about where green infrastructure might sit in that direction of travel, and where TfL might be in 10 years' time.
Do you mean green infrastructure in the narrow sense, like plants on walls, or green infrastructure, the sort of progressive
I think in the
agenda?
wide sense, and what I've seen from TfL, a really interesting example being the roads task force, an otherwise excellent report, and it felt like sort of green infrastructure was just sort of shoved in at the end and didn't realise its potential for doing some very interesting things with our streets and places.
You mean things like permeable surfaces and all that kind of stuff?
Heat island effect, aesthetic greening.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, what we've tried to do through the Roads Task Force and the program that goes along with that is bring in much more thinking about, the roads in London are 80% of our public space. So they're not just about movement, they're about lots of other things, which is what a local community would think. But, if you were a transit agency, you wouldn't think that. So, and I think we've been successful in really shifting TfL's mindset a long way along on that. But as regards the green infrastructure dimension, no, I think we haven't done enough on that at all. And there's a lot more that probably in the new London plan we need to put in some standards about, every time we repave TfL roads, we should be using this kind of material. We should have a target for increasing the number of, trees along the TfL network, all those sorts of things. I think there's a lot more that we could do on that. Also, the sort of pollution-eating plants and those kinds of things, which we've trialed a bit, but it should be a standard thing that we roll out whenever we, make changes on the road network. So that is something to look at in the next transport strategy.
Any other points? Any other questions people want to raise directly with Isabel? No? Yes? No? Isabel, one of the things that's on my mind, I suppose, just to wrap things up, is after 8 years you're leaving. Give us some predictions. I suppose, what are your predictions for things like personal travel? Is personal travel going to be dominated by new forms of... Is it going to be about better buses, or is it going to be about pods? We saw on the television last night on the news about transforming local environments with autonomous vehicles. Is the future going to be about better buses, or is it going to be something radically different?
I mean, I'm a total Luddite, so I'm not really a believer in all the driverless car stuff for other reasons. I think because people want the control over their vehicle. That's part of the whole experience of driving. But I'm sure I will be proven wrong, but that's my take on it. The only other thing I would say is that there's sort of this idea that over time, because of mobile phone technology, all this sort of thing, people are going to travel less. Why do you need to travel? Because you're trying to do something. You're not trying to travel per se. But what we've actually seen in London is that per capita, people are traveling more, not less. So, individuals are choosing to travel more. So that would go against the kind of received wisdom that because of video conferencing and God knows what and internet deliveries, there's going to be less movement. That so far, that isn't the case. And
the shape of London with an 11 million population, what shape will it be for you? Is it going to be more dense in the centre, or is it going to be more spread out? I mean, what do you imagine it will look like?
I think density is going to be in particular areas around certain nodes, and that's okay. That already happens in London. So it's really just building that out a bit. And people often forget that Paris is twice as dense as London, but nobody would describe Paris as a dense city. So London isn't going to look like Hong Kong, but there are going to be pockets of high density, as there are today, and there's other places where places are going to go from 2 stories to 3 stories. Not that big of a deal. I think the key thing is that we maintain the huge area of green space, the focus on parks, all those sorts of things. But that's eminently doable. That's all about how we design some of these locations.
You're leaving GLA. What are you going to miss from GLA?
The canvas is so broad, isn't it? So pretty much, as long as you've got the tenacity to see it through, you can do anything you want to do. And politics is amazing. It's an amazing force for change if you can really kind of grasp that opportunity and see it through.
Anything you won't miss?
Yeah, sort of dealing with the excruciating process of getting things to happen. I mean, quite a few things that I've worked on, I've tried to deliver a step change in what we're doing as an organization, and that's not the way a lot of big bureaucracies like to work. So that's been painful, but rewarding when you get to the outcome.
You left Boris off that list of things you miss or won't miss, so there you go. Isabel, thanks very much for joining us here today on the Fringe at Ecobuild, and thanks for being so open, and good luck in your new ventures at Arab.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks, Isabel. Thanks a lot.